Okay. Am I recording? Yes, I'm recording. All right, for this session, May the 13th, 5:18, Culture and Literature. And today we are close narratives as a literary product. And I think we've got two pending questions, two pending groups, basically. Today we have so far 8 participants. Good morning, Belén, Carla. I didn't say hi to you, Carlos. How are you doing?
Good morning.
María Paz. Hello, María Paz. Robina.
Profesor,
María Paz.
no sé si tuvo tiempo de ver su correo. Le mandé como 2 correos ayer en la tarde.
Yeah, I read the emails, and then I'm like sort of waiting for a confirmation whether you are or you're not giving your book report today, because yeah.
Nicole is still without electricity, I guess, because she's not. She has not connected since yesterday. Like at 8, I received the last message, and I tried to call her, but I guess she's out of battery in her cell phone.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, well, we have to get used to things like this that are going to happen. I understand that this is something that is beyond what you can control. So don't worry about that. All right, it's a situation that it could have happened to anyone.
Okay, thank you. I will message you as soon as I talk to Nicole.
All right.
And she will contact you as well, I guess.
No problem. I totally understand these situations and others that are connected with not being able to access because of electricity cuts, right, or because of computer issues. They are part of the process, right, of having online sessions, and sometimes whether you can or cannot fix it in time. We need to show certain flexibility in these cases, right? So don't worry. As soon as you fix that situation, we can move on with the rest of the presentations. Now, I remember once that one semester I told every group that was giving a book report to be ready. I didn't say that this semester, but I told every group in the class to be ready. So if a group could not give their book report, the other ones were supposed to be ready, and so another one could take over the session. So I kind of regretted not doing that this semester. So, but anyway, that's things
Professor,
happen.
I was thinking that maybe the hour that we will spend doing the presentation, we could do it on Friday. I don't know if that is possible, because on Friday we have an hour from 10:50 to 11:50, I think. Maybe we could have the other presentation after that time. I don't know if it could be possible to do it like that. So today we just have the hour for the content that you will.
Yeah, the slate narratives.
So I don't know if we could do it like that. I don't know what my classmates say, if they can also.
Let's see if we get some opinions here.
I don't have any problem if you can move the next hour to Friday.
All right, Kayla, thank you.
Well, I don't mind changing, switching the hours, but Mister, do you have any trouble with this, with this change?
Yes, that was my main concern actually.
No, 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 not at all. I was checking while I was talking with Maria Paz, and I have available right the hour after. So yeah, that could be done. I mean, on my side, on my part. So I'm waiting for you to confirm that. Does anyone have any issues changing the second section, the second part of this class to Friday?
Personally, I mean, I don't have issues with it, but I cannot attend Fridays because I have classes all morning. So therefore, I will have to watch a 2 hour lesson after works. But besides that, no.
Right, but still, it is a. I mean, you have to be somewhere else, so that's something that it is not an issue. I think it's a class schedule, a schedule clash. Sorry, it's a schedule clash. All right. Um. Okay. Well, I have I mean I came with different plans anyway. So I have a plan A, plan B, and a plan C. So we're going to vote. All right. Later on, we're going to vote, and we're going to decide what we're going to be doing the second hour. So um, this the first part of this session, today's session, May the 13th, we're going to finish Frederick Douglass's and Harriet Jacobs's slave narratives in terms of answering a couple of questions that were shared with you last session, and that today we were going to continue answering, and then we're going to have a break, and after the break, no, before the break, we're going to decide among the different options that I have, which path we're going to walk on, all right, for the second part of the session. Let's see if we have more participants. We have 11, right? Good. And the group number 2 was supposed to answer the question number 2, which was this one, I believe. Okay, so we need to ask group number 2 to share with us their opinions, their comments. Are the members of group number 2 present here?
I don't know if Barbara and Rocio are present today.
I don't see Barbara and I don't see Rocio here.
Racion is not here. She won't be able to attend this lesson today.
Rocio will not be able. Okay, thank
Rocio.
you. Thank you, Daniela. That makes Belen, you the only one? Is that right?
I think so.
Okay, so go for it.
Okay, so what we mainly discussed was what the difference, well, the main difference between the between the two authors was that Harriet Jacobs wrote for women. She wanted to approach this abolitionist movement through emotions. That was like the main idea we discussed. We also were discussing that both texts were kind of similar. And also that Harriet Jacobs and Frederick Douglass lived during the same period.
Okay.
So it was a very similar context. I don't know if the rest of the class can add something to this, because that was what we discussed.
Okay, thank you so much. Now, did you share a Google Doc or any kind of document in which you put on the comments and ideas? Like, did you brainstorm in a collaborative way with Barbara and Rocio? So, I mean, the ideas that you commented on are your own ideas or a summary of the discussion that you had with the rest of the group?
It was kind of a summary of what we discussed, the main topics.
All right. Alrighty. So in terms of I'm sorry, to be more specific in terms of the differences, you said that Jacobs addressed women and emotions. Yes. Okay. That would mean that Douglas would address more a logical aspect of the mind, a logical or more practical approach to slavery.
I think so. I am actually not very sure about that.
Okay, let's open up the discussion. What are your perceptions, class, in terms of the differences or similarities between these two slave narratives? Considering you have all read a bit of each one. Feel free to join the conversation. All right.
And I would say that maybe the publisher of these books or some kind of editor, if they had, maybe edited how these stories were written. Maybe in the Douglas was edited to be kind of towards the masculine side, and for Harriet Jacobs could be to the opposite side, depending on the editor or the editorial where that book was published. Because, well, on their own, maybe they couldn't publish that many books, I think. What do you think?
That is an open question, right? Let me read something to you. Both Frederick Douglass and Harriet Jacobs were authors of a slave narrative, which was, a book that described their lives as slaves and their struggles for freedom. Do we all agree on that one? I'll continue. Douglas's,
yes.
Okay, yes. Thank you. Douglas's narrative was the story of how he transformed himself from a slave into a free American citizen. His narrative was the result of his speech-making career, showing him his preaching style along with the rhythms from biblical texts that were familiar to his audiences. Okay, that's important to pinpoint that Douglas became a very skillful writer, a very skillful speech writer, and that he learned how to address audiences, because some people are very good at writing but not good at addressing audiences and convince them, persuading about political or religious ideas. So he learned how to manage, right, the rhythms and how to include all these biblical quotations or biblical references, because when you write for an audience or when you talk to an audience, you need to consider, right, which arguments are going to be more powerful or more influential in their minds, right, to persuade them and make their opinion tilt to what you think they should think, right? And so it's interesting the way he grew from an illiterate person to this brilliant speech making career, even going to, as I understand, going to Europe, right? So he became a very remarkable and known abolitionist. Um, I'll read this section about Harriet Jacobs. She began her narrative around 1853 after she had lived as a fugitive slave in the North for 10 years. She began working privately on her narrative not long after Cornelia Grinnell Willis purchased her freedom and gave her secure employment as a domestic servant in New York City. Jacobs finished her manuscript about 4 years later, but it took another 4 years before it was published. I'll continue reading. Gender, and this, pay attention please, gender considerations account not only for many of the differences in style that was seen in Douglas's and Jacobs's narratives, but also for the version of slavery that they endured and the versions of authorship that they were able to shape for themselves in freedom. In Douglas's first narrative, he focuses on the struggles to achieve freedom, while Jacobs focuses on the struggles of being a female slave. Right, so that is something important to remember. The gender inequality is seen not only in, as Carlos said, the publishers, right? It was not the same to publish a female writer, to publish a slave female writer, but also the aspects that they addressed were connected with, for example, Jacobs was a mother, and female slaves had a different way to pursue their liberty. I'm sorry. Can you give me just a second? I'll be back.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, don't worry.
All right. I'm sorry for the interruption.
It's okay. Teacher wanted to say something. I mean, to add something.
Yeah, go ahead,
In
please.
connection to the things you were talking about. Yeah, the difference between Douglas's narrative and Jacob's narrative is gender basically, and the sentimentalism given to the literature and the narrative, because what she wrote is the violence she received, for instance, sexual abuse. She gave birth to children, and she was also threatened to lose their children because her master threatens her to sell them. To sell them, and
Right.
yeah, that's an important fact to highlight here, because that didn't happen to men, but they both, men and women, slave men and slave women, they both live under precarious conditions. But there was this another situation for women as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So we need to understand that by reading these experiences, it's actually contribution to the American identity. Adding to what Danila was saying, the conflicts that both of these African Americans underwent um, contributed to a narrative style, which was called by many a fugitive slave narrative. And but the main purpose for them to describe their lives was not only to give a polemic, no, to give an account on from a, to cause a certain impact on the audience, but basically to end slavery, right? Um, and through the experiences to urge um, a white audience that was mainly based in northern states to end up slavery. So these slave narratives were both literary works, but at the same time became uh, propaganda weapons, right? It became like just like um, common sense that tried to convert or persuade an audience using political arguments. These literary works also um, implied that from a biblical perspective and also from human perspective, um, slavery should come to an end. So it is interesting how these voices are um, recorded in terms of recorded in a written literary work, and also recorded in their voice recordings, right? If you remember at the beginning in the first session that we started talking about slave narratives, they were also interviewed, and these interviews were written down or were transcribed. So they not only provide the reader with a window or a door to understand specific suffering, because we can learn about suffering by reading about the Holocaust, about different wars, but specifically in this one, we can see this assault on human nature and the lack of values and the hypocritical view on another race I mean, another race so-called like that in these years. So it's interesting that even though these two slaves were undergoing the same harsh treatment because they both were slaves, the uniqueness of their experiences rely on the gender, but also there's some authenticity which seems to be denied to Harriet Jacobs's literary work. Maybe because she was a woman, maybe because it was hard for some to believe that she hid herself in an attic for so many years. Maybe because I don't know, people may not understand that someone or a mother could live away from her children for so many years, hiding and just looking at them from one or from different attics. So, and even some of the slave narratives required letters of recommendations or letters that would support that these narratives were authentic. So you don't see that by any writer adding like a letter of someone saying this autobiographical account or this narrative is authentic and I endorsing this. You don't read this type of letters, supporting letters in any of other publications, but you see them when it's about slaves writing their own experiences. Okay, so because usually they had to use fictitious names like pen names, and they were actually denouncing in the case of Harriet Jacobs, they were denouncing, as Daniela said, sexual abuse, and that was opening like the Pandora box, right? Opening a conversation towards something that was going on between the masters and the slaves, and children were being born that had a white parent and an African American mother, and they were without the master's privileges, right? And sometimes they were sold because of the white master's wives' shame. So the families were separated because of this. So that was clearly exposed in narratives written by women or female writers, female slaves. And if you remember, also Frederick Douglass mentions that he wasn't aware or he wasn't sure about who his father was. But there was an idea about his white master. Okay, so that is something to remember, how families, how slave narratives written by slaves, because we will see that, for example, Uncle Tom's Cabin is also, it is a fictional slave narrative written by Harriet Beecher Stowe, who was a Caucasian, a white writer. He didn't need any letter supporting, so the authenticity of this stories was put in was doubted by some.
Yeah, it
Right?
was questioned because of the race, or because of the where they come from, and because of the freedom they deserve.
That's right. We're going. I mean, if you have read some of the historical background, you're going to be aware of, for example, that at some point, I mean, during the Romantic period, we're going to be reading about, for example, the Underground Railroad and how some fugitive slave acts were passed. So even though slaves who ran away towards northern states or even to Canada were enjoying freedom, um, because of this imbalance or these treatment or treaties, sorry, because it's treaties between the northern states or slaves who had the slavery abolished and this and the states in which slavery was still accepted and legal, as in the southern states. These states had to maintain sort of a balance in between them. So, like trying to maintain the same number of slaves as compared the same number of states with slavery legal as the same number of states with the with slavery abolished. So in this balance, which is a political deal, some acts were passed as the Fugitive Slave Act, in which slave owners were allowed to hire slave bounty or slave hunters to go north and to hunt down free slaves and to take them back to to states where slavery was allowed. So even when a slave could reach freedom, no one could assure them that this situation was going to be permanent. So that's something also important to remember, because this uncertainty would shape somehow their identity as a minority, right? And also which would project itself in the rest of American history, right? And we will see that the reason for them to fight for the rights later on this with Martin Luther King, right? It's based on the struggle and the social inequalities that they had to undergo while they were, while slavery was abolished in paper, but in real life, that was not the case. Group number 3, are you here?
Yes.
Yes.
Alrighty. So the microphone's yours.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm gonna start. As you were talking in the previous analysis or reflection, we well, for answering these questions, we had to go like to the internet to understand the context.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna make a sum. Yeah, Jacobs. After the story that was told in the excerpt, sorry, she had to go to her mistress niece that would become new mistress, and her father started to aggressively make her sexual harassment.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, she had 2 children with the neighbor, another slave, of course. But that wasn't enough, and she had to escape because of this Dr. Flint that Laura
We'll explain later. But the thing is that we thought that maybe that was the immediate reason that why she left, that why she escaped and left her children in that place. But also it was because she was aware. She was previously educated by the previous mistress, and that made her being like a bit more open-minded, and she could say, of course, this is not what we have to uh, what we have to accept. We don't deserve this. So that's another thing that made her take the decision. And also because we wanted to connect what the excerpt says and what the context uh, of the situation. Maybe Laura, I could continue.
Yes. So about the role that Dr. Flint actually played on this narrative is that he represents everything that was wrong with slaverism or slavery. I don't know which word is indicated.
Slavery, yes.
And slavery, and he was the one who abused the most Linda, and he actually, as Catalina said, he threatened her to kill her children. That is one of the reasons why she escaped. And he tries to break Linda's will in order to keep her captive and to keep her for himself, actually. Yes.
May I add
Right.
something?
Yeah, of course, of course.
Yeah, we also discussed about this role as a symbol that yeah, of course, he was a sexual predator, right? But he had this like evil power, because he was abusing of his power. So we thought that maybe having belongings, like the ownership, made him feel that status of power.
Yes, and I also read that he went after Linda when she escaped to New York, I think, because of what Catalina said, that he has like this kind of uh, power due to his ownership over Linda. Yes.
Right. All right. Thank you so much. The rest, please, you can join the conversation now, adding or disagreeing with the points that your classmates stated.
I would
So,
like to add.
yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead,
Yes,
please.
about what prompts Linda to make the decision to escape. And I think that he kind of feel disappointed because her mistress promised her dying mother to keep her safe. Then once the mistress died, she passed her to her niece. So I think that she was expecting something else, like to be freed. I think it could have been because her mister was a good person and he taught her how to read and how to write as well. So I thought that that could be also a reason.
Right. Thank you. Any comments? Any idea that's coming to your mind? Okay, I posted in the not in the chat room, but in the team. So I think it's a more I guess more of a permanent post. The website, nationalhumanitiescenter.org, and if you see here, it says a comparison of the narratives of Douglas and Jacobs demonstrates the full range of demands and situations that slaves could experience. If you skip here and say the fugitive or freed or ex-slave narrators were expected to give accurate details of their experiences within bondage, emphasizing their sufferings under cruel masters and the strength of their will to free themselves. One of the most important elements that developed within the narratives was a literacy scene in which the narrator explained how he or she came to be able to do something that pro-slavery writers often declared was impossible, to read and write. So that is one not permanent trait, but a quite recurrent element included in slave narratives, which is try to prove or try to declare in which at which moment the ex-slave who's writing, right, was able to do this impossible deed, which is, being prohibited and punished and flogged, physically punished, if they were caught trying to learn to read and write. That's something that we can find in common in between all many of the slave narratives. Keep reading. Authenticity was paramount, but readers also looked for excitement, usually provided through dramatic details of how the slave managed to escape from his or her owners. Because, a literary work is something that you read, and when you read it and you buy this book or manuscript, you have to be entertained somehow to keep reading, right? That's like sort of a rule for every literary work, even though they are historical account at some point. But these dramatic details somehow would keep the audience engaged, and also would help to convince them that slavery was not was an unnatural institution, right? Keep reading. Slave narrators also needed to present their credentials as good Christians while testifying to the hypocrisy of their supposedly pious owners, right? Because owners were Christian, and their unchristian behavior was proving that they were evil characters. They had to present themselves, right, as following God's command. If you remember, Phyllis Whitley's being brought from Africa to America, he's thankful for being christened and for being, taught the Word of God. That was another argument used by authors who were former slaves to had a more positive impact on the readership, right, on the audience who was reading their stories. Okay, you'll find interesting elements in the comparison. For example, also some of the differences is a reception between Jacobs and Douglas narratives. For example, when Douglas published his narrative of the life, etc., the abolitionist movement was beginning to gain political force, but Jacobs's publication was delayed, right? And it was overshadowed by the start of the Civil War, because everyone was, concerned about this Civil War, a war between brothers, right? Because basically a Civil War is tearing apart a nation. So Douglas was well known from the beginning, right? From the beginning of his career. It says here, as a speaker and then as a writer, right? But Harriet Jacobs, on the other hand, was never well known. So incidents of the life of a slave girl disappeared soon after its publication without a large scale, whereas Douglas's first book went through 9 editions. So you see that he will also find a difference, right? the moment of publication before the Civil War and during the Civil War, it makes a difference in the perception of the audience, and because Harriet Jacobs's narrative was rescued later, but Douglas's was known from the very beginning. So there is another difference, right? All right. I don't know if I posted this short PowerPoint slide sequence, and I'm not sure if I'm projecting this to you. Let me double check. Am I projecting this? Am I sharing this with you?
Yes.
Yeah. Are you seeing like a long list of yeah? So
We're watching a website.
Yeah, we are watching a website the same you were reading before.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate the feedback. What I'm trying to show you is the PowerPoint presentation that included the tasks for last session. So I think now I'm sharing with you the one that says consider Harriet Jacobs.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So next to Frederick Douglass's slavery narrative, do they reflect the same viewpoint? Do they consider the same achievements as triumphal? Do they present equal information about the distinct experiences faced by both male and female slaves? Do they agree that slavery is worse for a female slave than for male slaves? Are there pivotal moments or key passages similar? Are they equally interesting? Well, these are, of course, personal answers. But in general, contribute to the comparison between both narratives and emphasize their similarities and differences. And also there's an approach to the idea of gender as being one key aspect to have in mind when you are comparing these two narratives. Slave narratives such as Douglas's and Jacobs's emphasize the absolute helplessness of the slave before the forces of the law and society. Yet Jacobs and Douglas did resist those forces and did achieve freedom. Right? Is that achievement or freedom essential to a successful slave narrative? Does the slave narrative, like the romantic novel, require a meaningful, confirming resolution to achieve its full effect? So also personal answer, because you can perceive that a successful slave narrative lays its foundation on the successful act of free herself or himself of a slave. If he or she does not achieve full freedom, the slave narrative itself will become a failure. But again, that's a personal perception, right? So to have an idea about these, I would suggest, besides reading a bit more about Harriet Jacobs's and Fred Douglass's narratives, to review the website that I posted in the team. You can find it there. It's quite interesting because it's basically a condensed comparison. Okay. Let me stop sharing this. Okay. Remember I told you about plan A, plan B, and plan C, because unless there is another group ready to give their book report, the first book report will not be given today. If you were present here at the beginning, You already know. If you were not, that's why I'm repeating this information. So unless there's a group ready to give the book report, we're not starting with book reports today, but next class. Okay, so my suggestions are the following. Okay, we can have a plan A, which is we can have an introduction to romanticism. Okay, and in this introduction, we can review some aspects, main tenets, the principle or basic core ideas of romanticism. If you took the previous class, you already have an idea what romanticism is and isn't. Okay, so eventually, at some point, we're going to repeat some of the comments that we made the previous course. That's the PIN518. And we're going to see how romanticism develops in this new world, in a thriving and flourishing nation, right? So that's the one plan A. Plan B is I'm sorry, it's a web quest. A web quest is basically a search on internet as a group. Okay, so I'm going to divide you in subgroups, and one group is going to find out about the California gold rush. The other group is going to find about the Western expansion. The other one is going to find about the manifest destiny. Okay, so there are key aspects, the key elements. There are 7 that I wanted you to investigate and explore. Okay, so you find about these and you share your findings, and here we have an option. You find these in a Google Doc. I mean, an online collaboratively made document in which you are, posting your findings. Okay, or we can set up a forum so that in the forum you contribute, right, with the main ideas about the topic that you were assigned. Okay, and the plan C would be to use the time for your presentation or your book report, the one that you are having for this romantic period. And I'm open to any suggestions that you might have. Hello?
Professor,
I'm listening.
my suggestion was to move that hour for Friday. I was just saying because I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I totally agree. But in order to move or to swap this hour to Friday, we needed to have every single student available, and we don't have every single student available. So that's why.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, hi everyone. I came in late because my PC was updating, but I wouldn't have any problem with moving the hour to Friday. However, my group has 2 or 3 members who cannot present after the hour which is scheduled usually. So I'd like to be to please to be the first ones in presenting, so those two classmates don't have any problem with their schedules and appointments they have that day.
Right. Okay, so there we have another restriction. But from my perspective, but again, this is a democracy, and I would like to enforce and encourage that. But from my perspective, if one student cannot make it on Friday, then that option is not available. And as I understood, Daniela was not able to attend on Friday. She was able to, she's able to make it on Wednesday and on Friday, but only the first, I mean, the original hour that we have. So moving the time, the hour to Friday session would not be possible, unless we can find another moment. Are you available on Thursday 2:30 or 3:30?
I
What
think
about
I can't that Thursday afternoons because I have these thesis meetings.
okay, all right, yeah, sure. What
Professor,
about
with my thesis group, in which Nicole is too, we have reunions.
Got it. Okay, so not an option.
Teacher,
Yes, ma'am.
but if I'm the only one that cannot attend Friday session, I can watch the video afterwards. Cause I think I'm the only issue here for to put in words.
No, Danny, no, you are not the only one because I'm at the second hour. I have a thesis meeting, so I'm
Okay.
also can't to be in the class. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought I was the only one.
And even no, and even one,
Standby.
Daniela, don't worry. And even one, I mean, no, I mean, one student makes a difference. So that's the point. If one cannot make it, then that's not an option. Okay, so plan A, plan B, plan C. What do you can you write the letters just to have an idea? A, B, or C?
Professor, so plan B was to divide ourselves into teams and look for a topic, and then we have to write our answers in the forum.
Yeah, I mean, we can have the answers in the forum, or we can have the answers in one document, right? Like a Google Doc, you know, a document which is worked collaboratively, so everyone has a space in that specific document. All right, we have lots of C's. Let me count the C's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay.
Wasn't there
Professor?
an app? Sorry, Nati. Go ahead.
Professor, but if we choose plan C, we don't have an introduction to romanticism?
Exactly.
Oh my goodness. Uh, Okay.
I mean, it's not that you are not having an introduction to Romanticism. Not exactly, because when you are dealing with a literary work, you need to place that literary work in a literary context and a historical context. So basically, for example, Natalia, in your case, what's the book or literary work that you will be giving your book report on?
The Edgar Allan Poe Murders in the Rue Morgue.
All right. So you're going to be referring to a sub-branch of Romanticism, right? The Gothic movement. So you're going to be covering a certain context. You're going to give probably some biographical information about Poe, and you're going to be referring to what makes the Gothic movement so interesting and which aspects are explored by, right, the Gothic. Okay, so anyway, you're going to provide the class with an insight on the Gothic movement. Okay, so
Okay.
yeah, so Daniela, what's your literary work? I mean, the one you're going to be working on.
I don't remember the name.
Okay, Laura, in your
I'm
case?
sorry, but
That's all right.
it's like I have to present later, not this, because it's in other period.
Okay, good. It's in another period. Okay, Laura.
Professor,
Yeah.
we have to talk about Romanticism. We are the Scarlet Letter.
All right, all right. So you have to talk about Romanticism. This is Maria Bas, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you will talk about Romanticism. So you are probably going to include some core information about what Romanticism is, or the Romantic movement.
Yes.
Exactly, right? And then in your literary analysis, you're going to be referring to Nathaniel Hawthorne's view on because it's not the type
Is
of
it transcendentalism? Transcendentalism?
transcendentalism, exactly.
Transcendentalism. That.
Exactly. So we're going to be reading. Some of you are going to contribute dealing specifically with the romantic view or the romantic production. Others are going to be dealing with Gothic writers, and others are going to be referring to transcendentalist writers, and all of you complementing each other with different sub branches of the uh, romantic movement as a whole. So answering Natalia's questions, it's not necessarily that you're going to that we're going to skip an introduction to romanticism, but each one of you will cover a specific area or sub branch. So in the end, it's like building a puzzle, and at the end we're going to have the big picture. Um, Now, in the LMS, I uploaded some links to videos. At least one video deals with romanticism in general and how the movement started in Europe and then moved along to different geographical areas, and how it is spread not only in literature but also in different types of arts like painting, sculpture, etc., etc. Okay, there's another video that deals with specifically with the American Romanticism and explores different authors. And there's also a PowerPoint presentation that I found in a PDF format that is quite clear, like short and sweet. It keeps or gives insight on the basic aspects to remember, such as um, the human's relationship with nature, the influence of individualism individualism, as you know, each one of you has to find his or her inner self, and you need to define the relationship with God or with a higher, outer, powerful force. Uh, and and also you will find in this presentation that the romanticism is a response. Usually literary periods are a response to the previous point of view, right? If you remember, the previous point of view was very theocentric, was based on religious views, Puritans views more specifically, and also from a very mechanical perspective. But romanticism is or allows a very flexible, personal, individual experience when you're exploring truth from a more subjective point of view. Being subjective is good in this period, right? Having a personal experience with God, with nature, with the religion is it's highly it's very praised, right? It's highly praised. So it's an interesting change, a perception, because the cities are, putting so much pressure in the communities. The cities with all the pollution. I mean, we're going to see that later on. But there are some key concepts that I want you to remember, right? In this period. One of them is the California Gold Rush. Okay. The other one is the westward expansion, because in this period there's an interesting concept that comes connected with the concept of manifest destiny, which is, in a nutshell, the idea of the white man, that he isn't. And I'm saying he because before it was this very masculine male vision of power, right? Not anymore, or still, but before it was like highly condensed in all the political decisions. So the white man believed that he was entitled to move westwards and to take civilization with him, and to impose civilization from a Western perspective onto the indigenous peoples. So people were moving to the West. People were exploring this vast territory, this huge piece of land that was United States. There were a couple of historical events that I wanted to take a look at, like, for example, the Louisiana Purchase, which was, as the name says, right, a purchase of territory. Napoleon in France needed money. He was at war. He had to buy. He had to build ships, so he needed money. So the political American representatives at that time saw this as an opportunity to increase the size of a territory, and they offered Napoleon a very good deal for Americans, and they bought this huge Louisiana territory, which was right in the middle of United States. And then United States increased and almost doubled its size. So there was this huge hunger of people to move westwards, right? And then when in 1840 something, right, 40, I think 49, 1850, this guy discovered gold in California. We had this huge California gold rush. People going by sea, by land, and to make it, to make this American dream come true, to become rich, one day. I mean, and that was a huge change in terms of the impact that the colonists had in terms of demography, right? California was just small settlement, became like really, really huge, huge. I'm saying thousands of people. I mean, I'm saying from 1,000 people to I don't know exactly a number, but increased by thousands, and therefore, hospitals, schools, all of these that accompanies a huge search or amount of people, all these connected institutions like hospitals and schools and the law itself had to grow accordingly. So these important events are a very useful to understand the concept. There's also another one which is called the Trail of Tears, because when the white colonists were pushing towards the western states, and they were relocating and settling in these areas, they were at the same time pushing away the indigenous tribes. The natives were pushed away from their own lands. Sounds familiar? And they established there. And this Trail of Tears is basically a very sad moment in history for the Native American, or for the native tribes. Some of them had to leave their own territories because they did not have anything to hunt, because the bisons and whatever resources were available for them were not present anymore, because they were wasted or used up by the white man. I'm saying the white man because that's like a very common phrase to be used in this time to describe this general movement towards the westward, towards the west states. So and also it's important to remember the different relationship that the indigenous tribes had with the land and with nature, which is something that is highly encouraged by romantic writers. Romantic writers see native people and children, right, as something very valuable because of their innocence. I mean, the closer you lived to nature, the more innocent you were, according to romantic writers. So in this sense, natives were living off the land, were having a balanced relationship with the land, therefore were highly praised by romantic writers. If you remember the Last of the Mohicans, right? We see this character Natty Bumppo, or Hawkeye, who's almost a brother with the Mohicans, who has a very close relationship with nature. They hunt whatever they need to be fed, but there's not the view of they don't have like a capitalist view on making profit from nature. So there are many books, many literary works that have a very interesting romantic perspective. Even though they were not written in the romantic period, they still share a romantic perspective. For example, if you watch the movie Avatar, in the movie Avatar, you can see many connections with this period. If you have seen the movie Avatar, have you? I mean, that's quite a famous movie.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
So if you remember, there was
With the blue or the I know two avatars, so I got confused.
Yeah, Avatar. Um, well, if you remember, there's a scene here in the chat. Uh,
Okay, yeah, I
Yes.
know the one.
okay, exactly that one. So if you see this, this tribe had their own system of a very balanced relationship with nature, very healthy relationship with nature.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Hmm they only hunted what they needed to survive and were very respectful about the different beings. I don't know what else do you remember about this movie?
That they were expelled of their lands by the army. So
Exactly.
they destroyed all their lands and their big tree in which is that kind of mother for them and provides all the energy to the tribe or something like that. So was kind of catastrophic for them because they destroy all what they have to survive.
Right, right, exactly. And basically it describes what happened in during this period with indigenous tribes. Exactly, their resources were destroyed. They had to move to and relocate.
Hmm.
Um, they were sent to in the American history. Many tribes were exterminated. There was a genocide, and the survivors were sent to um, camps, right?
Hmm. Yes.
So that's the it's a clear depiction or a portrait of what happened. So Avatar is a good movie in terms of describing from a romantic perspective how important nature is, um, how you could connect with nature. If you remember, they had as you mentioned, there was a tree, and this tree would sort of collect all the souls, and there was
Yes.
this right, this huge collective idea,
Of
like
the ancestors of the tribe, I think.
exactly the ancestors of the tribe. So they had a very strong belief that there were individuals, but also part of a community, and that was a strength because they were part
Yeah.
of a community. Hmm
Yeah.
That's right, and this is present in many in or most of if not all the native tribes, uh, and then there's this clash with Western view in which civilization brings industries, and progress is seen as an imposition of what the ones that are civilized believe, right? We that live in civilization take civilization to you, and so we bring the train, the railways, we bring everything that comes with progress, and that is something important to remember because it has been going on for um, hundreds of years. Um, the one in domineering situations, or the one in with the power, are imposing other peoples who are you know weak to resist an imposition that might be um, in different areas, right? Linguistic imposition, economic imposition, uh, particularly when you see the history of the different empires, right? They are always imposing um, cultural elements as well, right? And so that's something that you need to remember. Also, under the underground railroad, uh, because it's connected with with the slave narratives. The Underground Railroad, which is not a railroad and it's not a train, but a series of resources, right? Exactly, Danila. Hierarchy. That's a really good concept to remember. The Underground Railroad, in which all these resources, people, houses, food, were implemented or employed to free slaves and to take them to freedom to northern states. The Underground Railroad, it's so interesting that I really would like you, I wish you could read a bit of it, because it's basically people that were so interested in that all human beings should be free, that would jeopardize their own lives to be involved in this enterprise of, taking. Some of them would collaborate with leading slaves. Others would help by hiding them in their own houses, in secret compartments, on secret areas in their houses. They would travel during night for crossing woods, avoiding, the main roads. They would be taken to northern states, and they would be liberated there. And if you have seen, again, a reference to a movie, the Schindler's List. Have you watched this one, the Schindler's List? Or are you familiar with the idea?
Yes, the movie, Professor?
The movie, yes?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So if you remember, in the Schindler's List, there's one I think it's a German businessman
Yes.
right? Do you remember the plot, or basically the main idea?
I think I don't know if it's a general of the Nazi Nazi region. I don't know how to say the word,
Regime,
but
yes?
that yeah, that save a lot of children uh, of the that were, I don't know if Jews.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and after many time, all those children things to this general to save them. But in essence, I don't remember perfectly the plot.
Okay, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. So he actually was an industrialist, right? He was a company owner, and he
Yeah, something like
yeah,
that.
and he employed people that were Jewish, and then helped them to escape. So it, well, something quite similar happened in the Underground Railroad. People were involved in this, in providing as many slaves as possible freedom by helping them run away to the north. And there's even a very famous Harriet. I think her name is Harriet Tubman. I think I'm not so sure about this one. Let me double check. Her name is Harriet Tubman, and he's such an interesting character. Such an interesting character that you would not believe his story. Um, Please give me a second to share with you. She was known as the Moses of her people. Moses is a famous character for liberating, right? Um, okay, liberating people from the yoke of the Egyptian, right? She was a slave. She escaped, but she escaped and came back to southern states to free other slaves. She became a conductor for the Underground Railroad, meaning that the conductor leads others towards freedom. And So she was a woman, but so powerful. She was it was like a soldier, a nurse, a scout, a spy at the same time, and and she was so brave that imagine she was yeah, she was exactly, she was a slave who came back, and if you had been a slave, probably the least you would think of would be to come back to the same states in which you were if you were caught, you were killed, punished, hanged. Uh, I mean, you were at the mercy of the white man's decision. So I that this is a character that I really admire, and I think you should take you know, some minutes to explore Harriet Tubman's life, because she's such a brave woman that you would really not believe what she did in order to save other slaves. So take a minute to take a look at her life, and maybe you are going to be surprised as well about her. Um, what else? Did I write a compromise over here? No, sorry. A compromise of 18. I think it's 1850. There are two compromises. Okay, yeah, the compromise of 1850. It's also important to know this historical event, but it's basically this balance, this political balance between slaves which prohibited slavery and the ones that were pro-slavery. So in certain historical moment, there was a balance between the states. And then remember that more immigrants were arriving to United States, because United States was seen as a very prosperous country at the time, and also people were moving from one state into the other. For example, as I told you before, California was just a small settlement, you know, of about 1,000 people, and became a large city, right, with all the people arriving to find gold. So then more states were created according to how people were moving, right? And so there had to be a political decision whether in these states slavery was allowed or illegal. Okay, so the Compromise of 1850 has a lot to do with this. So you need to be aware of this specific historical um, um, moment in time. Okay. Um, okay. I'm sorry about taking up of your time. The option that won was C. The option is time to work on your book report. So I will see you on Friday. On Friday, we're having, and this is a key question: Are we moving? Are we moving? Um, all the book reports. So Maria Paz and Nicole's book report is going on Friday, or are we taking their report and placing it at the end of all the book reports for the romantic period? So on Friday we have the second. We start with the second book report.
Professor,
Or
that's what I
I have a
wanted
question.
to ask you actually.
mm-hmm,
Whether, because we are group number 2,
mm-hmm.
so I wanted to know whether Maria Paz group is going to present or we continue.
Um, I mean, I could decide, but I'm very curious about students interaction. So why don't you
Yes,
talk to each other? Let's see. Let's talk about this now. And
because if Maria Paz wants
Professor,
to present, I
uh,
think we don't have any trouble to let them present on Friday if they want to.
okay.
I haven't talked to Nicole, so I'm not sure about making a decision now. So I will leave it to you.
Okay, so do you know Solomon? I think that's the concept, right? So my judgment is that both of you need to be ready for Friday. Okay, so both of you need to be ready for Friday, and then well, one of you will give the book report, but both of you should be ready. So let's say that Maria Paz and Nicole are present on a Friday session, and let's suppose that Laura or one of what member of her group has an issue, anything that things happen, so then Maria Paz and Nicole, you go, and the other way around also works.
So
Mr.
it
Okay.
will depend on what happens on Friday, whether which group presents.
The first option, I mean, the group that should go on Friday is group number 1.
Okay.
If anything happens, you should be ready.
So both groups should be
Professor,
ready by Friday.
Exactly.
Okay.
Professor,
Okay.
can I choose now? I talked to Belen and we decided that we will present on Friday, me and Nicole.
Good.
So
Then
we
it's
can continue with the line.
okay. Then it's settled, and Laura said that they didn't have any issues with that. So let's do that. All right. So I'll see you
Okay.
on Friday. You all take care.
Okay.
Mr.
Thank
Friday
you.
is just 1 hour, right?